No, I am be familiar to some of you. Steve Deace here filling in on AFA today for Kevin McCullough, who is out the rest of the week. You can hear me on many of these fine AFR stations. And why are they fine? Because they carry my show. You can hear me on many of these fine AFR stations as well as stations around the country each weeknight from 9 to midnight Eastern Time here with the Steve Deace radio program. You're always welcome to give us your feedback anytime, any place. Just email us, steve@stevedeace.com. That's DEACE. You can also friend us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Steve Deace Show. And if you are interested, if you listen at any point here today and you think, wow, I think this show is just terrible. I want to know if it's ever been any better than this. Go to our podcast archive. Find out for yourself. This is really as good as it gets. Go to our podcast archive over at stevedeace.com. That's our website. Be one of the 19 people that will visit that website here today. And you can go and listen to all of our podcasts, all of the shows that we have done. And you too will be amazed that the management here at the American Family Association have allowed this to air as long as they have. So just check out our website at stevedeace.com. I want to talk to you this afternoon about one of the things that's cool in my job is that a lot of newsmakers will come to me, particularly because of where I live. I live in the First in the Nation caucus state. Maybe you saw a feature David Brody did on the Brody File earlier this week about the Iowa caucuses, and you thought, okay, there's Rand Paul, there's Ted Cruz, and who's this Steve Deace guy getting interviewed next to these U.S. senators? That would be me. And it's because of where we're situated, even though I do a nationally syndicated show, living right here in the First in the Nation caucus state. We are sort of at the, I guess you'd call it, if we want to use a biblical metaphor, we're kind of at the Valley of Megiddo here. Just this little strip of land right out in the middle of nowhere where all these different parties converge to go to war with one another. We are kind of this little Valley of Megiddo out here in the middle of nowhere, in the Midwest, the flyover country according to the Beltway. And because of the First in the Nation caucus status we have, I get access because I live here, and apparently there's a rumor out there that our show reaches a lot of people that vote in these caucuses. And so because of that, a lot of national newsmakers, I've got relationships with them. I get a chance to build rapport with them. I get a chance to see some of the data and some of the things they know that maybe they don't want for public consumption, or they want them for public consumption. They just don't want to be the one that helped you consume it. So they might pass it along to me, so then I will give it to you. And so I get a lot of opportunities to see a lot of how the process of politics, which frankly to me is the Civil War. Politics is how we conduct civil war here in this country. We don't have banana republics. We don't have coup d'etats, although we might be on the road to both. But we have a system here where we can metaphorically kill each other every 2 or 4 years at the ballot box. We can air our grievances, grind our axes, vent our grudges, and there's a winner, the smoke clears, there's a winner and a loser, and the winner celebrates for about 15 minutes, and we begin it all over again for the next time, right? So we have this perpetual cycle of civil war in this country called politics, and yeah, there's a lot wrong with it, but as Winston Churchill once said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all of the others. So there's really not a great way to do this side of heaven, post-Genesis chapter 3. We are in a fallen world after all. So we've sort of figured maybe the best way to do it is to create a system where almost no one can get an advantage. No group of elites can get an advantage. And we pit everybody against everybody else so that we actually have gridlock, so that the system moves slowly, so that one group of radicals cannot capture the flag, if you will, and then in an instant totally change the direction of the country. And that comes from the total depravity worldview of human nature that your post-reformational founding fathers had. And so they created a system where sometimes it's frustrating at how slowly it moves. But then you see somebody in the White House who just disregards that system and moves rather quickly and swiftly, and now you're afraid. Why? Because you're seeing someone just totally disregard the rule of law. You're seeing someone use the office of the presidency to, and let's face it, pretty much we have seen this consistently in our era since Lyndon Johnson. Presidents in both parties use powers of the presidency that do not exist. But this president has taken it to an entirely different level. And I get emails from a lot of you around the country. You're scared, you're afraid. And you know why you're scared, you're afraid? Because you're seeing somebody, one group of elites, try to capture the system and move it quickly to the left, as quickly as they possibly can, and disregard the process, disregard the American people. And if you disagree, you're a racist, misogynist, homophobe, radical. Well, what we're seeing now is the radicals are starting to fight back. Because some of the data that I am allowed to be privy to, the trend line for the 2014 midterm elections is unlike anything I have ever seen. In fact, I would venture to say there is a tidal wave forming for next year that might be unlike anything seen in recent American political history. Because the anger, the frustration, the disillusion, the American people, those of you listening or watching this right now, that you have for the system is unlike anything I've ever experienced. For the first time in my brief and frankly, rather lackluster radio career, you're angrier than me. We take calls sometimes, and I have to look at our producer, Rebecca, on our nighttime show, and I'm like, have the eject ready. You're angrier than me. When I first started doing this, I was angrier than Michael Savage. Now you're angrier than me. You're angrier than me, and your anger is getting more palpable. And that anger is out of a sense of betrayal. Now, we didn't have polling or talk radio or 24-hour news networks during other equally tumultuous times in our nation's history, like Reconstruction or the 1850s, the period leading up to the Civil War. And in fact, about a decade and a half before that, in the 1830s, the country was mired in a terrible recession. That led to a lot of tumult. Maybe the gold rush is maybe what saved us from that recession. How about the Whiskey Rebellion in the early days of the Republic? We didn't have the ability to manifest your opinion corporately, instantly, the way we can today. We didn't have the ability to do that in those days. So it's impossible to know if the current anti-establishment mood in the country, where it ranks all time. But I do know this, it's unprecedented in modern times. Even the counterculture upheaval of the 1960s, that was largely one generation versus the rest of the culture. This is different. And unfortunately, that generation's in control of the country today. But in this case, this is a transgenerational clash. I have never seen anything like what 2014 could be. It's not as simple as anti-Obama. It's not 2010 all over again. That was the Tea Party uprising, the uprising of the conservative grassroots, and a lot of that was a check and balance against Obamacare. By the way, Taco Bell announced today they have now crossed the 700 million sales threshold of their Doritos Locos Tacos. They have sold 700 million. I believe at last count, 27 people have enrolled in Obamacare, 5 from my home state of Iowa, and we apologize for that. I don't know what that means. I just thought it was an interesting distinction. My guess is if you're one of those people consuming mass quantities of the Doritos Locos Tacos, you may need Obamacare soon. But this isn't anti-Obama. It's not anti-George W. Bush if you look at the election of 2008. This is something bigger. This is anti-status quo. This is widespread vitriol against the powers that be. In the past decade, look at what we've done in elections in this country in the past decade. We have voted for total Republican control, split government, total Democrat control, split government. That's in one decade. That's a lot. Consider from 1994, or prior to 1994, it took the Republicans almost 50 years to get control of the House of Representatives prior to that year. We don't normally see these large swings, pendulum swings in public moods in our elections. That is a lot of turnover in a decade. And evidence of an uprising is everywhere. Let me give you some examples. We have several entrenched Republican senators now facing credible primary challengers. Lamar Alexander in Tennessee. Lindsey Graham in South Carolina is facing 3 in a runoff election. Now Pat Roberts in Kansas is facing Milton Wolfe, a relative of Barack Obama, who I've interviewed before, by the way, and is very funny and very conservative. In Kentucky, the Senate Republican leader himself, Ditch McConnell, who just got unendorsed today by a Tea Party group that made a huge mistake endorsing him in the first place. They decided, maybe we shouldn't have endorsed a guy that just called us traitors. So they've unendorsed him. He's facing a credible primary challenger named Matt Bevin, who's going to join us here, by the way, later in the hour. You've got one of the leading right-of-center advocacy groups in the country, the Club for Growth. They are out there with a website, primarymycongressman.com. One of my favorites, by the way. Liberal comedian, commentator Jon Stewart. Did you see what he did to Kathleen Sebelius the other day? Now, I've never seen an episode of The Daily Show, even though it's my generation. And I'm pretty confident I'm a better class of human because of it. But I did watch that, and I would urge you to do the same. In fact, he destroyed her so thoroughly that he might have created sympathy for Kathleen Sebelius. And that's hard to do, to create sympathy for the gal that drove George Tiller's getaway car from all those late-term abortion clinics for years. But he destroyed her on Obamacare. And he's a liberal. Look at the Virginia governor's race right now. We're less than a month from Election Day. Both major party candidates are still polling under 50%. And you've got a Libertarian Party candidate in that state who has no paid staff. Let me repeat that. It's an all-volunteer campaign. And he's not rich. I think I read he makes a nice living. I think I read he might have made $200,000 last year. That's a nice living for the vast majority of us. But if you know what a campaign costs, particularly in an expensive state like Virginia, statewide, that's not the kind of money that you can self-fund. He's got an all-volunteer campaign, and there's polls where his support ranks anywhere from 8 to 12%. Credible polls. How about all the media hysteria about the so-called government shutdown? And how can something be shut down when it's still operating at 83% capacity? Anybody? Anybody? I mean, if you're only shutting down 17% of your operation, you're not shut down, especially because that was way too much government to begin with. And most of you agree. In fact, the vast majority of you agree, because polls show over 80% of the American people feel as if the ongoing government shutdown has really no impact on their lives. And you know why they feel that way? Because it doesn't. Only 3 in 10 Americans just heard the newscast here at the top of the hour here on your AFR station, talking about Republicans offering a deal for a short-term increase on the debt ceiling. That will not be popular with the American people. Polls show only 3 in 10 Americans. 3 in 10. For those of you that went to public school, that's like 30%. That's a low number. 3 in 10 Americans favors raising the debt ceiling. Congress's current approval rating, hard to believe, last I checked a few months ago, it was 9%. Below root canals and cockroaches, it's sunk lower. It's now at 5. 5. As in the number prior to 6, after 4. Excuse me. Meanwhile, less than a year after being reelected, President Obama's approval ratings, they're a lot closer to George W. Bush's abysmal 34% he had when he left office. They're a lot closer to that than they are the 51% of the popular vote that he got last November. And there's a lot more numbers where this comes from. We come back, I'm going to share more of these numbers with you. And then I'm going to tell you what I think they mean and what they might mean for at least one person in this audience. Because if you ever wanted to run an anti-establishment drain the swamp campaign, 2014 is your year. Stay tuned. You're listening to AFA Today.